Enterprise Management 360.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Tech Chats. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Andrew Watson, who is the Chief Technology Officer at MHR International, a global HR and analytics company. So, Andrew, welcome to Tech Chat, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm looking forward to today's discussion because we're going to be talking about what comes next, really, because we're hopefully reaching the end of this pandemic and we're starting to see a semi-return to normalcy at this point. So the next hurdle that organizations are really going to be facing is resuming business as usual, what that new normal looks like, and also what it kind of means for them. So to start off with, I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on it. If we could kind of acknowledge that, you know, many companies are realizing how well remote working has actually worked for them. And inevitably, there's going to be this kind of uptick of people wanting to do it more long term, and it's just going to become a standard for a lot of people. So from your standpoint, what do you think the extent of this will be, and why?
We at MHR have seen our technical dev teams have transitioned very well. We've certainly not seen a decline in any productivity in that area, and I know from the industry and talking to friends and colleagues of mine that they're similar. So we know the signs are good for remote work, and that's going to be excellent opportunity for the future. As managers and leaders and execs, I think it's been more of a challenge. A lot of what we do in business is face-to-face networking, quick chats, corridor conversations, the water cooler kind of conversation. And that's been much harder. That has disappeared. And yes, we can have face-to-face video conferences, but it's not quite the same. They're very much organized meetings. So that's diminished, and we've got to overcome that a little bit. We've certainly seen a proliferation of tool sets to try and replace some of these things. I know from my experience, I'm having lots of conversations with my direct reportees, but I'm losing that awareness of all my employees and teams and how they're feeling and what they're doing from a day-to-day point of view, not just, you know, what busy doing from their work point of view, but how they're feeling during this period. So that's going to be a big problem for businesses to overcome for true remote working. And I think we've all got to accept that those people who were working remotely in organizations before had these kind of problems anyway. They were always remote. The office was the hub, everything centered around that, and anyone dialing into the office. So back to the sort of question of what extent, I think, yes, there'll be a significant take up initially, but it will balance back. I think we kind of adjust to that. We're humans. We kind of elements of contact and social contact. So that's going to be important to us in business to maintain that. So a lot will depend on the tools that we can put in place and how well we can make them work.
Yeah, definitely. And I 100% agree, because from my personal standpoint, I think that's the element I miss the most is that kind of human interaction and just back and forth that you have with your colleagues, right? And it's difficult to get back to that point, and hopefully we see that soon. And I'm glad you brought up mental health as well, because I think another aspect of this is when we do get that sense of normality back, it's going to be going back to work, but a lot of employees are going to be kind of anxious to do that, whether they have to travel long distances, they're not comfortable in the current setting, or they're not confident in measures that have been taking place. So what steps can managers really take to offer them support and help them through that?
Well, we saw this at the start of the pandemic, the same thing, didn't we? There was the anxiety and concern regarding a change, and employees are going to be nervous about coming back to work. Yeah, you're right. And there are those still constraints about childcare, public transport, vulnerable adults, risks themselves. So what can we do about that? We need to bring a sense of normality back. And I think as leaders, we can show that, starting to get back into the office ourselves and showing that it is a safe environment, strong risk assessments about what we've got in place. We'll have to make allowances regarding the social distancing and being able to adopt that as much as possible. Still having the flexibility that we can be in the office and remote working. People can swap between the two. We can change hours. We're seeing organizations talking about that, not sticking to the regimented 9 to 5:30, lengthening that through the day to be able to cope with childcare constraints, etc. And that's going to be important for people. But above all, I think, and it links to the first point, is communication. We've just got to communicate more. I think there's the side to it that we as leaders can communicate differently. probably talk about some of our own anxieties as well, because we have them as well. Being open and honest about what we're going through, that will help employees understand that it's the same for everybody, and showing that these environments can work.
So in light of all of that, there's no arguing that the pandemic is definitely a turning point for how organizations are going to have to operate. You mentioned a lot of points there that are going to need to be implemented. So with that being said, what's the likely before and after of business? From your standpoint, what do you think that's going to look like, or really, what do you hope it will look like?
What I am hoping comes out of this is that we have a much stronger acceptance of remote working for organizations. We have the tool sets to enable us to have remote, and I don't like the term remote actually, because I still think there's an office-based culture that still needs to be maintained. And we want people to be able to work in other environments and not feel like they're being treated as second-class citizens in a way. And I think before, that was very much the case. And whilst everyone was remote, everyone had the same problem. So we found tools and methods of working that's kind of worked for everybody. Once we're back in the office, or some people are back in the office, we end up getting that kind of herd environment where you work in one way and anyone dialing in has to work in a way that works with it, and it doesn't kind of work. The tool sets don't work. So I think we've got to get to that place where you can be in a different location and the experience be the same, that the culture of the organization, the way meetings are run is exactly the same. And we've got to get to that point.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and now is the time to have that conversation. Now's the time to adjust those continuity plans and make those steps going forward to implement a new way of working. So you're right, it's going to be a very interesting space to follow over the next, even changes within a year are going to be very, very interesting to compare. But Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure today talking to you. Thank you for giving your insight and going in depth with us about this. It's really been a good conversation. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who took the time to watch this episode. We hope you took a lot away from it. We'll be back next week with another episode in our Tech Chat series. In the meantime, you can also go follow us on socials at EM360 on Twitter and LinkedIn. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. And of course, for more great content, head on over to em360tech.com.